Hello. Welcome to the podcast, Human Rights in America, a Revolutionary Mindset. I am your host, Sue Young. I've been away for a couple of months. I've been studying for the Colorado bar. I don't have my results yet, but I'll let you know when I know. So in the meantime, I want to celebrate September is National Recovery Month. It's a time to raise awareness about mental health and substance use disorders, the achievements of those in recovery, and promote availability of treatment and support services. Season 3, Episode 1 is dedicated to mental health. What follows is my interview with PhD candidate Jose Rosario, who is many things. He is gay, Latino, he's in a wheelchair, and so much more. So sit back, take a listen, and enjoy this episode. Today's topic is going to be about mental health. I have a great guest with me today. I usually start off with some poetry or a phrase, a quote or something, just so that we can all get on the same page. I have an excerpt from a poem from Charles Bukowski. It's called The Laughing Heart. Here's an excerpt. Your life is your life. Don't let it be dubbed into dark submission. Be on the watch. There are ways out. There is light somewhere. It may not be much light, but it beats the darkness. Be on the watch. The gods will offer you chances. Know them. Take them. You can't beat death, but you can beat death in life. Sometimes, and the more often you learn to do it, the more light there will be. Your life is your life. Know it while you have it. You are marvelous. The gods wait to delight in you. My guest speaker today is Jose Rosario. Jose is the founder of the Phoenix Empowered, a nonprofit that highlights the mental health stories of queer, disabled, BIPOC, and other marginalized voices. As a gay Latino person, as well as a mental health advocate, scholar, and provider, Jose has brought his professional and lived experience to TEDx, Washington State University, and many other venues and stages. He is relaunching the Phoenix Empowered official podcast, Phoenix Unbound, in the fall of 2025, with the new host, Cameron Cole. His current research focuses on teen queer folks' experiences with hate-based violence and cultural trauma, and how this community engages in radical healing and response. I am so pleased to have you here, Jose, speaking with me today on mental health.
Thank you for having me.
So before we get into mental health and human rights, I would love for you to clarify a couple of terms for my listeners.
Sure.
In your bio, I use the word BIPOC. BIPOC. Can you explain what that means?
Yeah, so it's a term that has emerged in the last couple of years to be all-encompassing, but also recognize that there's a lot of diversity in the communities of color. And so it stands for BIPOC, Indigenous, and People of Color, recognizing that we're all different shades and experiences and ethnicities, and there's beautiful richness there.
All right. And secondly, I use another term called Latin, queer folks' experiences. Latin with the E. Can you explain what that term means?
Yeah, as a native Spanish speaker, I can tell you that Spanish is very gendered, right? Our words are gendered. And so there was a recent push in the field of linguistics, especially in academia, to really think about people who maybe don't align one way or the other. And so Latine is the most recent gender neutral term. People may have heard Latinx, but there was some pushback about how, that X sound really doesn't align with the Spanish language. It's more academic. And so Latine has been kind of, I guess, co-signed by the community as being a helpful way of being inclusive.
Well, thank you very much for that. I know I didn't understand, so I know there are others. Do you have any introduction that you want to say for yourself about the clinical psychology aspect that I didn't
Sure, yeah. I can definitely do that. I mean, when people read my bio, I gotta be honest, the first reaction I have is, wow, there's not enough coffee in the world to wear all the hats that I wear these days. But I'll say I really love what I do. I believe that I am a storyteller and I want to encourage other people to tell their stories. Clinically, a lot of the work that I do and my research is really about trauma and understanding how people experience harm, but also how we come back from that, right? We heal and we build. And so I really focus on both sides of that narrative, the pain and the healing. And that's a little bit about who I am as a person.
I think that flows right into what we want to do. You were described as queer Latino in a wheelchair. Today, we are going to talk about mental health for the whole human
Yeah.
because that is where it starts. Until we can own our own individual mental health, how is it that we can then be empathetic towards others if we don't even understand and realize and recognize our own?
Yeah.
So today, I just want to hit on a couple of those issues. From your perspective, as a clinical psychologist, what fundamental connection between mental health and human rights? What is that fundamental connection between the two?
I'll jump back and I want to answer your question about the whole human too, because you said something really important. I really think that labels can be really helpful in empowering us, in making us feel less alone, in making us feel like I'm not the only one that has experienced, for example, a human rights violation. But I also think that sometimes labels can have the opposite effect, just like anything in extremes, right? If we're too
Right.
defined, then like you said, we lose that empathy piece. And I think what I really want listeners to start this conversation with is the idea that we all know what it's like to feel sad, what it's like to feel happy, what it's like to feel pain, and what it's like to feel joy. We live the human experience. And so all of us, we all have a stake in the mental health experience. We all have a reason to care about mental health. Now, that being said, I'm biased and I know that. I'll answer your question about the intersection. I think you can't have mental health without human rights. Psychological well being is human rights, right? Psychological well being means living the life that you want to live, aligning with who you are as a person. It means feeling safe and supported and affirmed. Human rights do the same thing. They're meant to make people feel safe and wanted and affirmed, and like we can achieve the goals that we want to achieve. And it's about equity, it's about creating a space where people can thrive. I think you can't have one without the other.
And I agree with you 100%. That's my podcast, Human Rights
Yeah.
in America. So I want people to know that this isn't a new door. The poem I read earlier serves as a powerful reminder that every individual has a right to their own life and to fight for their own sanity and happiness, no matter the circumstances. It's a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the fundamental right to self determination.
I'm finishing up my PhD, about to be a full-fledged clinical psychologist, and I've been thinking a lot about the field and where we come from. We come from a place where psychology, where mental health had a ton of stigma. And I will tell you, growing up in the Latino community or the Latina community, I heard that stigma all the time. One of my grandmothers once told me, "When are you going to go be a real doctor?" There's this level of lack of understanding. And I think we stigmatize and treat people with mental illness, serious mental illness or mental health condition, like they don't have dreams and goals. And that's shifting. Now we're seeing people say, no, no, we have to create support so people can heal. And, you know, a little bit of a spoiler, you and I talked a little bit, and one of the things that drew me to your podcast was you understood what I meant when I said we have to do more than just cope. We have to heal. And I think that's the important piece here. We can't ask people to just settle. We have to ask people to want to thrive and to build.
I agree with you 100%. And yes, we did talk about healing, and I want to get to that, but I want us to slowly walk
Yeah.
through the door of mental health because everyone has mental health. Some people can deal with it. Why is it that some people are better able to deal with mental health crisis more so than others, whether it be anxiety, depression, whatever it may be? But it seems like it's inherent. Is it really like natural to deal with these?
I wouldn't say that it's inherent. What I would say that it's an interplay, right? It's an interplay between who we are as people in our environment. And I think for a long time we had this discussion of, is it nature? Is it nurture? Nature versus nurture. Where we are now is more of an interaction, right? And so I do think, yes, from a temperament perspective, some of us can handle stress a bit more than others. But what I actually think is more powerful is how somebody is able to access support when they are struggling, right? And so I think a big indicator of folks who can cope and who can live their lives are the people who have social support. We talk about how it takes a village. It's that
Right.
community. We need that.
So how do you violations of human rights, such as displacement, persecution, or systemic discrimination manifests in the individual's mental and emotional well being? We have people in these communities who are experiencing a lot. I'm not saying we're perfect. I'm just saying we think we're on the outside looking at the other side of the window when it's really one big window. We're all on the same side.
Here's the thing. I would argue most people, not all, I will never speak in absolute, but I will argue that most people have a combination of identities that give you more access and some that give you less access, right? And that's what we're talking about when we're talking about marginalization. I always tell people, if you have a gut reaction to the words privilege and oppression, it's because we're teaching the system piece wrong. We're not actually saying that if you're privileged, you've never struggled. It just means you are not struggling because of X or Y identity, right? We're not trying to compare struggles. And so I think it's important to start there. And I love what you're saying about like, how do these violations impact people? Because you're right. We're not just staring in the window, we're in the room. Like we are a collective of people who are witnessing people in pain. That's going to impact you too. If you're empathetic and thoughtful and kind, your listeners are being impacted about what's happening in the world. And here's the thing, I keep saying, but it's so important for us to understand that we can't disentangle the person from their context. If a person is suffering, let's imagine a person has low self-esteem. That's going to be exacerbated by experiences of discrimination, of violence, of being told no, of being told you're not good enough. All of these things, right, build up and they erode your mental health. When you see this happening not only to you, but to people who look like you, what my research tells you is there is a collective impact, right? Even if you are not the one experiencing the violence, just because people in your community are experiencing violence, we see experiences of trauma and distress. And as you said, we're not the first ones doing this. This research has been around for almost 30 years.
Right. We know that if you see someone in our community suffer, you can suffer the trauma. You share the trauma. I'm going to say our communities, United States of America, and we see right now, we see pictures of kids being gated at the border or people unhoused on the streets, maybe in front of your own business. And knowing that they're out there in all sorts of weather, people who have food insecurities and they really don't know where their next meal is going to come from. How does that impact us in our community?
Yeah. From a cultural trauma standpoint, and my first study really looked at the cultural trauma sociological theory in psychology. We understand that collective witnessing, right? Seeing people in pain that you connect with, even if it's just seeing other Americans in pain, if
You're right.
identified, there is something that happens in you. Why? Because it reminds you, oh, these things are not guaranteed. I'm not always safe. Anything could happen, right? So when we hear the next set of news cycles on the next tragedy, it stirs up that fear. And for folks who have been discriminated against, there's another layer, right? Because it's like, oh, I am being attacked because of who I am, not just, luck of the draw or chance or where I am, but because of who I am, I'm being attacked. And so that adds even more threat to mental health, right? Even more of the I'm not worthy or not enough. And that's where that pain comes in. And how could you not, if you're talking about children in cages at the border, that stirs up an emotional reaction. And I'm going to call all of us in here and say, like, some of us get the opportunity to turn off the TV, but the people living it don't get to turn it off. They don't get to stop.
That was so great. How can a psychologist use their expertise to be an effective advocate for human rights?
Yeah. So I practice therapy through a framework called radical healing. And I can't take credit for radical healing. Radical healing comes from incredible healers and scholars and clinicians that all came together and said, communities have been healing for generations. How are they doing it? And so part of the radical healing framework is something you hit on, Sue. You talked about how do we come together? That is healing. One of the ways that I think therapists can support healing is being in community, is getting out of our fancy private practices or whatever you call it and actually getting to know what is the community I'm serving? Who is a part of this community? What needs are not being met? Should I go volunteer at a food drive? Should I be present at the local car wash, fundraiser for the high school? Can I show up? Because we have to find the people that need us. I think the expectation that people will find therapy is not always true because that means that you think everybody's going to feel safe in therapy. Some people don't feel safe, or because of stigma, some people don't feel safe. So I think therapists need to be willing to kind of be non-traditional and be like, I'm going to come find you and earn your trust so that you'll trust me in supporting you.
I see a lot of commercials how people can find their online therapists, and I know people in the business of that. But it's putting the onus once again on the individual to go find help. It doesn't, it's not starting as if we're all equal and at zero and that we're all going to be there to support you. So we're telling you go in your own house, go on your own computer, and in the privacy of your own home, find someone online that you can talk to, but don't put it out in public. But that's not really the supportive public that we need. I think we need to step back a step or two and ask, what can we do to be supportive of those people that need help, without them having to do everything alone in a vacuum?
Yeah. And I think on top of that, as a therapist, I will never be comfortable with being a person's only support. As their therapist, my part of my job is to help folks identify who are going to be the people that are going to see you. They're going to understand who you are, your quirks, the things that upset you, the things that make you you. Who are those people that are going to uplift you? And supporting people in skills to ask, right? Assertiveness or interpersonal communication skills so that people can build out their network. Your network can't just be the therapist, but the therapist needs to support you in figuring out how do I be intentional, right? Like the poem you said, right? How do I
Mhm.
find the ways in which I can own my story. Yeah.
Right. And that's another thing that came up, the narratives that people tell publicly
Mm,
after trauma in court. How do they
mhm.
tell it to a public on stage like TEDx?
Yeah.
How are they safe when they on Instagram when people want to share a story without fear of negative backlash to recreate the trauma? How can they create safe spaces?
Yeah. Well, and I think there's a difference, right, between recreating the trauma, creating community and support and safety. And so I always tell people like the details of your trauma, if you're not ready to share them, and there's a lot of work that needs to happen before one is ready to share them, that is okay. But it doesn't mean that there can't be purpose there, right? And one of the things that radical healing also talks about is that in that community, one of the ways that community is healing is that it gives you an opportunity to come together to mobilize, right? We can process grief when horrendous things happen to our communities, and we can say, we're going to hold this together. What are we going to do? What is our collective action towards human rights and equity going to be? And that piece is important because I think after trauma, after harm, people want to heal. People don't just stand in the corner shivering for years on end. After that point, people get up every day. You know, if you get out of bed after something horrendous has happened that is impacting you, that's a win. I think Gen Z has done an incredible job. I mean, I'm seeing high school kids talking about going to therapy, which in my generation definitely was not happening, right? And so there is
Right.
a shift that is happening. And yet, I'll be honest, there isn't a shift that talks about identity and human rights enough. And that's where the Phoenix Empowered comes in to really try and fill that gap to say we can't actually separate identity, mental health, human rights. It's all together. Mental health is a part of all of these systems.
And you're absolutely right. People might ask, I can only do so much. If we can get them just to cope with their illness. And you had a really good response to my question about coping. You said there's a difference from coping and healing. Do you want to talk about that for a
Yeah,
minute?
I'm really passionate about this. It's kind of a newfound passion over the last couple of years, thinking about, okay, well, what is the goal of mental health care? And I think for a long time, the only goal really was symptom reduction and teaching people to cope. Now, I'm going to publicly say that that is so important. We need to have, less anxiety symptoms. We need to have coping skills for things like panic attacks. That is very important. And one of the things that we're thinking about as a field, especially in more contemporary times, is that that's not enough, right? So the example I always give is if somebody is unhoused or has food insecurity and is worried about where they're going to get their next meal, yes, I can certainly talk with you about coping skills related to managing anxiety, staying present and navigating experiences of panic. And that's only a band-aid, right? If we don't actually address the systemic issues that people are experiencing, work with people to say, how can we connect you to food? How can we connect you to housing? Then we're not actually setting people up to live life. So the difference is coping is about symptom reduction, healing is about getting to live. And you can have both, but leaning on coping and none of the healing means that all we're doing is trying to teach people that what they're feeling isn't okay and we need to shift it without actually giving them the tools to shift.
Well, it makes sense because as soon as you said it, the old phrase, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, came to
Mhm.
mind. If they didn't have bootstraps on their boots, how were they ever going to pull themselves up? And if they didn't own a pair of boots, how does that even get in the picture then?
Right. It's so funny you said that. I and I get that this is a self plug, but I'm going to do it anyway. The Phoenix Empowered. I want to tell you that that was a very intentional name because even in my own story, right, there was always this narrative of like, oh, you'll be fine. You can do it. You can do it. You can do it. everybody kind of expects you to rise from your ashes when you meet a challenge like the phoenix. But where I think we miss the mark is that when people have been told they can, when people have day in and day out seen chronic discrimination towards their communities, people don't actually believe that they can. And if you don't believe that you can, if you don't have hope, how am I supposed to expect you to just pull yourself up by your bootstrap? And so the name Phoenix Empowered comes from I want you to rise, but it's my job as a therapist and speaker and researcher to encourage and empower you to rise. Because if I don't do that, how are we going to see change? And that's exactly what you're talking about. How do you pull yourself up if you're not told you can?
Right. Or even given the same tools to do it. All right, let's get another question. Let's see. Um, Here's one. What role does narrative, an individual's personal story, play in human rights advocacy? And the second to go along with that, how can telling stories create empathy and drive change?
Mm, yeah, let's talk about it. I will tell you that the image I'm having in my head right now, listeners, is each of you just driving home in your cars or maybe walking and heading back to home, or maybe you're washing dishes. And I can imagine you all thinking, oh my gosh, I could never get up there and tell my story. It's scary. And I want to start by just saying, never would have imagined that this would be my life. I never thought that I would get on a stage and tell my story. In fact, that first time I did it, I was really resistant and really scared for a lot of the reasons I just named, right? It's scary, it's vulnerable. But I will tell you that my life has changed forever because as a therapist, we were trained never bring yourself into. But the reality is, until I was able to tap into hard moments in my life. And I've had some really powerful moments in my life where there have been people who have cut me down, but also people who have uplifted me. And until I was able to take stock of that, I couldn't see what my purpose was. And I think
Mm.
storytelling makes us human. When I talk about struggle, when I talk about hope, when I talk about joy, it's because I'm living that too. I'm living the human experience. So I see storytelling as a vehicle to bring people in, to say you are not the only person who's experienced pain. You are not alone. And I want to hear your story. I want to know how you feel. But I think you and I would agree with this that storytelling may be the thing that sparks the change, but then it's up to us to actually make change, right? Because how
Yes.
many times do you hear the snappy story, but then the human rights work doesn't actually happen after that? And so I believe that when somebody tells us their story, we have a responsibility, and it's a pretty important responsibility to act. And each of us has a story, right? So if you tell somebody your story, you have given them a platform by which to make change.
And I would add to it, you say everyone has a story. I think everyone has the ability to, it may not be that everyone is equipped to go and be a speaker of the house or anything like that, but you can go to your library where they have town meetings. You can speak up on behalf of the stories that you're told. I think storytelling, it goes hand in hand with mental health. I think mental health has been around since the beginning of time. And I think we tell our stories and we share the heartaches, the joys, the loves, all through storytelling. Can storytelling heal us, even for a minute, reduce anxiety, fear, anything? Does it empower us in telling stories?
Yeah. What the research tells us is yes. And I would say, from my experience as a human and as a therapist, yes, because telling stories liberates, right? It allows you to put the name and the language to your experience. And I loved what you said about not just the trauma, because I think storytelling means telling the whole story, right? We tell ourselves portions of the story every day. I'm not good enough. I'm lazy. I'm this. I'm that. And the reality is, no, let's look at the entire narrative. Let's look at who this person is, not just their struggle, but the fact that you've gotten to this point, right? I always remind people your body has gotten you to this point. Regardless of how you feel about that body, you are here. And so telling that whole story is liberating. I think it's healing for us. I'll speak for myself. One of the most surreal things about being a speaker is that I was forced to look at my story in its totality. I was forced to be like that kid who is disabled and felt not good enough and felt different, who was told he wasn't going to accomplish anything. That kid has gotten to this point that has now become who I am today. And being able to understand that, to kind of hold that kid gently, has been healing for me. But I also think that when we share our story, we heal others because then others are like, oh, I too have felt different or scared. And now I have somebody that I think I can trust to share parts of myself with them. I can't tell you how many people have shared their story with me over the years. And each time I see it as you have given me a mission. You have given me an important piece of work to do, which is to make sure that I honor your lived experience.
How do you honor a lived experience? What's the next step for you?
Yeah, for me, it's listening and then empowering other people to act, right? The Phoenix Empowered was never meant to be the Jose show, and it'll never be the Jose show. It's meant to be a space where people can share stories, connect, find community, and then also allow us to shape mental health action, mental health activism, right? What changes need to happen? How do we advocate for these changes? How do we create safety? And so I think my job when people share the story is to say, this is a need. So what's our response going to be? I always tell the team, it's not enough to say, oh, that's so sad. Oh, that's so bad. No, we have to say, okay, so what are we going to do about it? As a team, as a collective, what are we going to do to support people? And if we can't do it on our own, and most times we can't, finding people in the community who are also passionate and partnering to really make a collective splash in the pond.
I think that's a great segue into collective resilience. Remember that you have the right to self determination, to be this fantastic human, no matter what the characteristics of your person is. When human rights are violated, the psychological damage can be immense. How can people and communities build resilience in the face of such adversity?
Yeah. Something that comes to mind, again, another component of radical healing. We could have a whole podcast just on radical healing, but that's another day's conversation.
Right.
But something that comes to mind that I think about a lot is ancestry. So, especially these days, right, where let's just be real, folks. It is a hard time some days when you're seeing so many people in pain on social media, on the news. It can really wear on your soul. And for me, what's been really important and for others, from what we know, is to recognize we have been here before. We have been in hard times before, and people have kept the fight going. Whether we consider civil rights activism for human rights, whether we think about indigenous people, there's a couple of stories that have shown up in my life, and as I get older, they become more important. One of them is thinking about the Taino indigenous tribe of Puerto Rico, where my family originates from, and we talk a lot about how the Taino women would fight for the island when it was being colonized. They would strap babies on their backs and fight for the islands. And one of the things that has really kept me going over the last year is thinking like, I come from those people, that blood, that collective, not only resilience, but resistance is in my veins. The people who crawled up the steps of the Capitol building for the Americans with Disabilities Act, their blood runs in my veins as a disabled person. And being able to tap into all of the civil rights icons that have created the pathway for me to do this work. And now I'm in a weird spot where now I have to think about how am I going to keep the path going for those who are coming after me because they're coming. The young people are energized and we want you to be.
Right.
And so I think collective resistance means looking at where we've come from and looking at how we've always persisted. We've always found strength. The trick is, can't do it alone. We're not built to do it alone. We need that social connection.
I understand that ancestry portion of the answer. It's it's remembering who we are. We've
Yeah.
been in this position. History is a powerful teacher. It reminds us of what it was like to live in the 1920s or the 1880s or 1760. We are here because they were here when they thought they couldn't live through that lifetime, but they did. And their lives brought me to life. I'm not talking just genome, but these sections and swaths of people, whichever the Jewish community, all of us, we have survived and we are obligated to give the young people something to keep it going. We're not dead, like the poem said. We can beat death in life. If you want to give back anything, it's to give back to our ancestors.
And, you know, something else I was thinking about earlier, you were talking about, going out to your local town libraries. Giving back looks different. One of the things that I'm finding in my current research right now that I have done all these interviews and collected all this data is people are talking a lot about activism. And activism doesn't look the same that it did 5, 10, 20 years ago. Activism is much more broad and varied now. Some people talk about activism as their art. I paint, somebody told me once, and because they were painting, that was their activism. They story told through that medium, right? There are people who just create a friendly face and or a friendly connection and smile at the person next to them. That is activism. Reminding ourselves, activism is pushing against a system to create safety and justice, and that's important. And I think we give back in a lot of ways. And we also have to remember, give back to yourself. Those of you out there who are doing human rights work, y'all need to hear it. I'm going to say it. We need to rest. Rest is resistance, right? We need to make sure that we are well. We need to make sure that we are finding joy. Because if we don't, how do we keep the hope alive? How do we know that we're going to be able to keep moving forward? It's like the great Marsha P. Johnson said, protest during the morning and dance at night, right? Like we're gonna do what we need to do.
That is so true. When I mentioned going to the library, because I'm realizing now that there are great meetings at the library, it is fascinating. So I say that you can go to your public library and find resources there. I saw one of the questions, and it was, how do we express activism in art and storytelling and music in our creative juices? And you mentioned it and you said, even a smile walking down the street is your form of activism. Saying hello to someone in the grocery store that you could normally just walk past, to give them a smile, that's your art. It doesn't take artists to create the activism for the day. It's not solely their job, but we can do our part, you
Yeah.
know?
People
Uh,
just want to be seen, right? They just want to be seen and made to feel respected and affirmed.
yes. And we can acknowledge that. You don't have to go to a stage or even in your library to acknowledge what's right in front of you, whether it be someone experiencing trauma, or unhoused, or someone asking for money or food or anything. If you have it, you can just give it. It
Mm.
it doesn't really take that much. I know I used to live in New York City, and on the weekends, I would put a couple single bills in my pocket and ride the subway because inevitably you see life and you see people who are in different stages of their journey. You see the musicians on the subway, great. I award them money for their talent. then I also saw hungry people, you know, that I had a banana in my back pocket that I was not going to eat. So why not just give it to somebody? I watched the man eat the banana and he ate that banana like he hadn't had food for a couple of days. And it was just giving what I had to get, and I'm not saying that this is what everyone has to do, but when you see something right in front of you, you can make a change.
Yeah.
Just do it. Don't ask for permission. Don't have to first announce it in the newspaper that you saw this and you want to do it. Just do it. That's part of that community. I think you were talking about earlier that we all have a role to play in the community.
Absolutely. And I think those of us who are more public facing, right, do things like talks and workshops and consultation. I think
And podcasts.
yeah, and podcasts, right? Like when we are so up and involved in what's happening in the world and forthcoming with ourselves, I think people then come up with the idea that that's the only way to do it. And I'm going to be honest, none of us believe that we are bigger than the mission. And if we do, then we're not doing the work the way we're supposed to. All of us have a role to play. Listener, you have a role to play. You listening to this podcast and saying, I want to take X amount of minutes to think about equity and justice and love for my fellow human being, that is important. And I hope that, you get to take something from this and say, I want to make my own change. People say, oh, a ripple in the pond doesn't matter. But if we're all making a ripple, eventually that collective ripple is going to become a wave and that's going to shift the tide.
Yes, I agree with you wholeheartedly. Well, in wrapping some of this up, I would ask for our listeners, what is one key takeaway you hope the listeners will remember about the link between mental health and human rights?
Yeah. Hmm. The thought that comes to mind is we can all be supported in coping, but that's a short-term solution. Long term, we have to address the ways in which folks don't have access to basic needs and psychological wellness if we want to see a society that is joyful, powerful, and connected. So I guess the one thing I would tell you is for those of you who either know somebody that's in pain or for you if you're in pain and feeling alone, find a way to connect and find the people in your life that are going to affirm you. We need each other. And if you don't have that community, if you're out there listening and you're like, I'm in pain and I have nowhere to turn at this moment, that's why platforms like the Phoenix Empowered exist. You are welcome, you are loved, and you are seen in our community. And the fight for human rights begins with human decency. That's what I would say.
Well, I'm going to second that human decency. There's so much we can talk about. I think we could talk forever about
I
this.
think we could, yeah.
I think we could. And maybe our next step would be to talk about those marginalized communities. And again, how do we see the trauma as Americans when you watch the news cycles over and over again? And you see, and some people, you don't want to turn on the TV, how, and appreciating your right to live your life, self determination. And what does it mean for the other person, too?
Yeah.
You know,
And if listeners tell you they want it, we can definitely do that. And I can get nerdy because that's my area of focus. And like I said, people came before me. We have decades and decades of research on this topic.
well, with that, I think I want to read one line. Jose, thank you so much for speaking with me today. Do you want to tell people anything about your podcast coming up in the fall?
Yeah, absolutely. If you're enjoying conversations like this, then you will enjoy the relaunch of our podcast. As Sue, I'm sure you can tell people, a podcast is a lot of work. I did season 1 of The Phoenix Unbound, and I sat with it for a little while and thought, it's just not human enough. It was great, but it wasn't human enough. And so we are coming back better than ever with more playfulness, more joy, more just humanity. And it's myself and another member of the TPE team, Cameron, one of my best friends, talking about psychological well being, talking about human rights. So if you like those kinds of conversations, come join us while we hang out. And we'll be launching very soon. If you want to keep up with when we're launching, follow the Phoenix Empowered. You are welcomed in our space. You're welcome in our, what we call our home.
In closing, I just would like to reiterate a line from the poem from The Laughing Heart by Charles Bukowski. Your life is your life. Know it while you have it. You are marvelous. The gods wait to delight in you. Until next time, be revolutionary, be human.